Looks like Alexa is. Hello, Alexa. So Alexa, she may just be one of our very first StuCan interactions, like from 2013 or 2014. So she's been a long time StuCan follower and user and supporter of the type of curriculum that we create here at StuCan. And so we're very appreciative of her and the feedback that she's given us, and excited to hear from her today. So she's going to be talking about what's new in social, how to implement a social media marketing and trend exercise using Facebook Live. So this is once again one of those very specific takeaways that we can take away from this and starting tomorrow use in our courses. So let me introduce you real quick to Dr. Alexa Fox. She's an assistant professor of marketing at the University of Akron. Her research interests include digital marketing, user-generated content, online privacy, and measurement of cognition and emotion. Alexa teaches social media marketing, digital marketing, and consumer behavior, and has worked in other areas with strategic marketing and online endeavors. And so we're excited to hear from her experience, be that educational, be that industry and live, like in the trenches on digital and social media. And so without any further ado, Dr. Alexa Fox, the time is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm really excited to be here. And you're right, it is kind of interesting because I've had such a long journey, it seems, with StuKent, which is fun for me because I was kind of an initial beta tester for an online live or a synchronous class before it was really much of a thing years ago. And I incorporated kind of the original StuKent product, the Mimic product, and the simulation. And I still use it today in my MBA class, my digital marketing MBA class. And since then, I've really had the opportunity to expand my use of StuKent products, including the new social media marketing textbook that's come out within the last couple of years. I use that in my undergraduate social media marketing class. So I'm thrilled to be here today to share a little bit of my experience and to kind of give back to StuKent a little bit. And that social media marketing class that I just discussed is the one where I do this exercise that I'm going to be talking about today. And that is a social media marketing trend exercise using Facebook Live. So I'm really excited to share some of my insights on how I implement this activity in the class. So I just want to briefly cover what we're going to be discussing today. I'm going to talk a little bit about what exactly I mean by a trend exercise. Many of you may do something similar where you have students analyze a trend in your classes, but I want to kind of tell you the approach that I take with it. And then I want to talk about the two different parts of this project. So this is actually the students' midterm project in this class. And there are two portions, an individual portion and a team portion that are kind of broken out into a blog and a live event. So we're going to talk about that. I'm also going to talk about how this trend exercise could be implemented in an in-person class or in an online class. I've done it in both settings, and so it can be applied in either context. And I'm going to talk a little bit more specifically about how it works and some of the best practices that I've learned now from doing it. I believe it's been 5 semesters that I've run this exercise in my class now, and some of the benefits that the students have shared with me, and just a little wrap up, and I'll be happy to take questions at the end. So what is a social media marketing trend exercise? Well, really what we're talking about in this case is I want the students to be able to do a critical analysis or deep dive into a social media marketing trend that is impacting the marketing field. I find that students aren't always necessarily as appropriately equipped to really choose a trend and then analyze that trend as I'd like them to be when they get to my class. So I think this is an important skill, even beyond the social media context, for them to really be able to identify and really do a deep dive into that trend. So the students are required to select a trend in social media marketing that's been occurring over the last year. It can't be something that has been any more from previous times than that. Now, it can be something where if the trend has been around or the phenomenon has been around, but it's changed in a radical way, they are able to choose something along those lines. But I find that making sure the students choose something that is broad enough where they'll be able to cover enough topic and make it enough of an interesting presentation, but also something specific enough that they're not going so broad that it makes it really difficult for them to get to be experts on that topic is an exercise in and of itself. So I really try to hone in on helping the students select the correct trend, which is, again, something I'll talk about a little bit later in the presentation. But essentially, this is what we're talking about when I say a trend exercise. And there's two parts to this event. So there's a blog post portion and a live event portion. And the blog post portion of the event, just to give a high level overview at this point, the students deliver their insights in these two different ways. The blog post is an individual assignment where the students are actually doing research, learning about the trend, and then they're required to come up with a individually composed blog post over the course of the first few weeks in the semester. I have a great partner who I work with, a digital agency in Akron, who does a really good job of helping the students kind of get prepared for writing this kind of content and how it looks different than a paper they might write for an English class. And so this is the first opportunity for them to really get to be experts on their particular topic. This is an example of a finished blog post, a polished piece from a student who talked about the use of the hashtags ad and sponsored in various social media. Specifically, the student was mostly looking at Instagram. And you can see how when it came together and it was really finalized, what this finished piece looked like. So I will talk a little bit more about how it gets from what the students write to looking kind of like this as we get a little bit later into the session. But this is kind of the first piece of that exercise. The second part then is once the students have written their blog post and they've received my feedback, they actually work with a partner to kind of have a conversation about the social media marketing trend that they are researching. So the students, when they choose their topics, they already have in mind a partner that they're going to work with eventually, so that that particular topic that they choose is related to their partner's topic, but still distinct. So for example, this semester, I had two students who worked on, they were really interested in the topic of influencer marketing, but specifically they wanted to look at the use of artificial intelligence in influencers. So in other words, influencers that aren't actually real people. And one of the students took a look at advantages of using artificial intelligence in influencer marketing, and the other student took a look at disadvantages. In this way, they were able to compose individual blog posts rather well, but they also were able to kind of marry their topics to have this discussion during a Facebook Live event with their partner. So from the screenshot here, you can see an example of what one of these discussions looked like. So it was hosted, what I typically do is I host this Facebook Live event on the University of Akron Department of Marketing Facebook page. So that's where it's broadcast from. And as you can see, there's a variety of people who are kind of engaging. And I also try to kind of keep up as the moderator of the Facebook page in real time with summarizing some of the students' insights and really just kind of managing that conversation. So again, I'll get a little bit more into the specifics of this in just a moment, but I wanted to kind of just set up that there are two pieces to this trend analysis. So the idea here is that the students are, like I said, kind of honing in on their topics in the very beginning. And the first 4 semesters, so the first 2 academic years that I did this exercise, I let the students choose their topics, where I said it had to be a social media marketing trend or a topic that emerged within the last year. And it had to be related to their partner's topic, but distinct so that they can be discussed individually in their blog exercises, as well as together, as a part of the Facebook exercise, the Facebook Live exercise. This semester, I tried something a little bit different. I specifically focused the project on influencers, and I called it All About Influencers. And all of the topics that the students covered were related to influencer marketing. So in this case, I actually gave them some suggestions as to some different subtopics within influencer marketing and helped them kind of come up with topics that were related to those particular subtopics, and created a sign-up sheet with some of these big picture topics, and they had to create specific subtopics within those bigger picture ones and sign up for that topic. And once it was taken, once someone already had said that they wanted to work on that specific topic, then it was off limits to any of the other students. So what I tried to do is have each partner team housed within the same big picture topic, but again, each of them had a specific subtopic related to that bigger picture one. So another example of this, I gave the example of the artificial intelligence one, but another example was with the big picture topic of relationship management for influencers. One of the specific topics that the students identified was how a brand can effectively manage relationships with influencers in kind of the modern day influencer marketing world. And the second topic was what happens after the relationship between a brand and an influencer ends, right? So now, you know, influencer marketing is big enough where we see a lot of this. We don't necessarily see influencers sticking around with the same brand. We see them kind of changing and flip-flopping sometimes, or maybe ending a relationship with one brand, starting a relationship with a new one. So I think this idea of relationship management and how they kind of manage their own brand in relation to the brands that they're working with or on behalf of is really important. And so I think that this topic, for one, you know, being more about how to effectively manage relationships as they're occurring, and then one being more about what do you do when it ends, was kind of a nice way for them to complement each other and also serve as an interesting influencer marketing related trend. So there's also two formats that this exercise can be kind of done in, which is an in-person format as well as for an online format. So as an example of what it looks like when I do an in-person class, it is still an online event. The Facebook Live portion is still an online event, but the students are recording live in person. So it is that they're in front of a camera, and that camera is capturing what they're saying on Facebook Live, but they're together and we're doing the recording aspect of it in person, but it's being broadcast through Facebook Live. And this example here is an example of what that looked like just a couple of semesters ago, when we were able to have people sit next to each other and not wear masks and, you know, not do all the social distancing. This is what the students were literally doing, having an in-person conversation, but speaking to the camera, which was broadcasting to Facebook Live. In an online format, and like I said, this is how I'm teaching the class this semester, is in an online synchronous format. The students are separate. They're in their own apartments, or they're somewhere on campus in a, you know, safe, socially distant area, wherever they might be. And we were able to actually have them both be kind of conversing at the same time, so they could hear each other in real time, speak to each other in real time, but they weren't together and they weren't with us. They were using their own webcams, and it was still broadcasting to the Department of Marketing Facebook Live in real time. So as noted by the creative director of our partner agency that I work on this project with, you know, he had mentioned to me as we were kind of recapping after this semester, he said the challenge of everything being virtual is for everyone. And it's okay that the virtual format doesn't necessarily look as polished and pretty, because you don't know exactly what the students' lighting situation is going to be like, what the background is exactly going to look like. We did try to encourage them to attend to those things the best they could. But I think creating that virtual format in whatever capacity you can, and not having it be perfectly polished, and kind of recognizing the value of that, but still having it be a professional event, is a very important skill for students to gain, especially now when we're doing more online meetings and presentations than ever. So just using the platform that you use for your online class, whether it's Zoom or Microsoft Teams, even something like that would be fine to implement this trend exercise in more of an online live kind of format. Okay. So let's talk a little bit more specifically about how it works and kind of how the assignment works, and some more specifics about how we can deliver some of this information in both the blog format and the Facebook Live format. So usually I have a timeline that looks something like this that's presented to students at the very beginning of the semester. Students select the topics that they'd like to work on early on, usually by about week 2. And they should really start conducting research using trade publications as soon as the topic is selected. What I usually do is I give them suggestions on Twitter accounts to follow or email lists to sign up for, like TechCrunch or Wired or Mashable or Moz. Any of these or more would be great opportunities for them to get some inspiration for their ideas for selecting and honing in on a topic. This allows them to really immerse themselves in relevant publications and to study the trend throughout the first part of the semester, and to help them really become a content area expert. Okay, so then, as you can kind of see with the blog post, they individually create this creative and engaging article that appeals to an everyday audience. And they try to reach them through the composition of this blog post. That's the assignment that they're given at an individual level. The creative director at Monsters Unlimited, which is the partner agency that I work with here in Akron, they're a creative agency in the area. He does a guest speaker sort of talk on effective content marketing right about week 3. And I ask that the students apply his best practices in the blog post exercise. So he talks about ideal length. He talks about ways to kind of break up the content in an effective way. And what the students do is they submit the blog posts. And in addition to my graded feedback, the team from Monsters Unlimited, the agency, also provides their feedback. So although their feedback doesn't count towards their grade, I'm still the one grading the blog post. He is able to give some real world, kind of expertise to say, hey, I do this all the time. I create this kind of content all the time. Here's what I would do to kind of polish and hone in on your on your blog post. Then as we get into a few weeks later into the semester, we have the live event. As a partner team, they discuss their topics in this Facebook Live event. The talks are usually around 8 minutes in length total, I would say. And I require the students to prepare an outline just with brief talking points for the live event that's due in week 7. And then we kind of go live, so to speak, with the event in week 8. I have 2 class meetings in a given week. So the first class meeting is dedicated to a technical rehearsal. It's not to go through the exact presentation and conversation, but it's to make sure that students understand, whether they're in person or whether they're online, how that conversation will work and how they'll be able to share the information. And then that second class, so it's usually on a Thursday, because my class usually meets on Tuesday, Thursday, is when we actually do the live broadcast event through Facebook Live. So the entire project is done by week 8 of the semester, which makes for kind of a nice midterm project. And then we kind of turn our attention to other aspects of the course for the remainder of the semester. So just a kind of brief word from our partner here, who I mentioned, the creative director of Monsters Unlimited, the creative agency in Akron. He shared some kind of interesting feedback that I wanted to provide to you guys, which is that, as someone who does content marketing very often and hires students for entry-level positions, he said, taking the written content that they've done for their blog post, right, and repurposing it into video content, where they're responsible for making sure that their own professional image is maintained, right? And that they have prepared appropriately to really deliver the best content they can. Taking into the account the nuances of that learning experience is really important for students. And we find that most students have not had this kind of opportunity, where they've taken something they've written individually and then they kind of work with another student to polish something that's more of a verbal or an oral deliverable. And so I find that students really think that this tends to be a very valuable learning experience, because it's not something they've tended to had the opportunity to do in other courses throughout their college career. So I want to speak just a little bit more about the tech rehearsal that we do. I mentioned that it's usually the week of the event. It's the previous class right before the event, where the class session before that event serves as this tech rehearsal. And like I said, we did this in more of an in-person or a virtual environment. The photo you're seeing here, the man who's standing closest to us in the photo is Patrick Jebber, who you just heard from the creative agency that I work with. And then the students are kind of, standing behind him. And this is actually our TV studio that we have in our College of Business. It's a really tremendous resource because it has really professional lighting and cameras, and we can use all of this to our advantage for an event like this. But you certainly don't have to have this kind of setup in order to run this event. All you would need is a pretty standard looking background and a quiet space for the students to come in. And you could use your iPhone on a tripod, and as long as it's kind of connected to the Facebook page that you want to stream to, you'd be able to do this exercise just fine. This is just a really neat opportunity to take advantage of a tremendous resource that we do have here at the University of Akron. And so, like I said, this tech rehearsal is important so the students can see the studio, so they can see the setup, so they can practice sitting on the chairs if it's an in-person class. And this event is run over the course of this one class session where we're kind of just talking about, all the nuances of the tech. If it's more for an online setting, the students are, of course, in their own settings with their computers, but they're practicing with the software. They're practicing with what it is that they're going to need to know in order to successfully open the right program in their browser, make sure their video and their microphone settings are all appropriate. So the rehearsal looks a little different, but I still think it's a good idea to have that tech rehearsal in more of an online setting as well. So I want to talk about a few best practices that I've kind of learned over the course of executing this exercise over the different semesters that I've done it. And one is to really kind of think about some blog post considerations. So for one thing, we don't actually have the students compose the blog post in any kind of specific program or even on a website. I simply have them use Microsoft Word. What I tell them is that I would like them to try to create the blog post to look as realistic as possible, as if they were writing it to be posted on a web page. So in other words, I'll ask them to use subheadings. I'll ask them to use images to make it as blog-like as possible, so to speak. What happens is through the process of my grading and through the process of the creative agency providing feedback, they actually select a few students' work who it's really well done. It just needs some polishing, some honing to take it to publication on their own blog network that they have through their company. And so what they'll do is if the students choose to take advantage of that opportunity to get their work published, then the creative agency will work with them to create it into something that looks a little bit more like the image on the right. So this is a student, the example that I'm showing here is originally what the student submitted is on the left for the purposes of it being graded and for the feedback from the creative agency. But then the finished product, because she was someone who was selected to have it taken to publication and worked with the team in order to have that happen, the finished product is on the right. So you can see how it kind of evolved into something that looks, again, like a polished professional blog piece. I've thought a little bit about trying to actually have all of the students get the experience of actually creating a blog post, not doing it in Word, doing it in something that would be more ready for web publication. But I think the real value comes more, for at least the purposes of my class, comes more from the content creation and what they're actually saying in the blog post, being able to analyze the trend appropriately. And I think being able to do that next piece is probably a little outside the scope of the class. So like I said, I kind of save that for students who have the opportunity to maybe then take it to publication with the creative agency. And I should also say, even if the agency doesn't select a particular student's work, but they really want to work, they want to get their work published, the agency will work with them too. If they're approached, they'll say, hey, I'd really like to, if you'd be willing to help me hone my skills, make the blog post a little more polished, they will work with any student to try to get it to that point of publication if the student is willing to put in the work. And then, like I said, as far as some best practices related to the live event, there's several things to kind of keep in mind. It's really important to promote the live event. You want to promote it to some ideas that I kind of have developed over the semesters is to alumni, to advisory boards, to fellow faculty, to prospective employers, employers that your college has built relationships with that really want to see what the students can do in a real setting. I'd also recommend that you create a Facebook event on the page that you'll be hosting the live event from. And I also always tell my students to invite their professional contacts if they have, you know, an internship they're doing, their supervisor at their internship, and even their parents. You know, it's not every day that, you know, family gets to see what their kids are doing and see them in action in a college setting. I always have parents that come, and I always have such proud parents being able to say, oh, wow, I had no idea that my student could deliver such a great professional presentation. They're commenting in the Facebook Live, and it's really neat. It's really an opportunity, I think, of pride for family to kind of see them interacting as well. I'd also encourage people to comment, not just to come and attend and watch the live event through Facebook Live, but to engage. When there's a lot of discussion, it's more interesting for everyone. You know, people end up saying things like, oh, wow, I didn't know that, or this is a super interesting discussion. So you can kind of see a screenshot of some of the conversation from a previous event that I'd held. And it's really a nice way to kind of have a back and forth dialogue. I'd also say that it's important to consider asking for students' Twitter handles ahead of time if they're comfortable sharing them, and tweeting during the event. So we have a Department of Marketing Twitter account, and you can kind of see in the lower left corner here a sample post that I created. And so in real time, I had already created some of these tweets ahead of time. I had my ideas ready to go, and I had the students' handles tagged in that. And I was able to kind of update our Twitter account in real time to really give a shout out to the particular students who are talking at that particular point. I also would say that another interesting idea is to tell your university. So our University of Akron account, the actual university's account, you know, quote tweeted something that I had posted from our department's account and really showcased it to an even broader audience, you know, to anyone who was following the university on Twitter. I've also engaged alumni, which is a really cool way to do it. So the student in the top left corner that you see here, she was someone who was one of my the first students who participated in this exercise, and now she's graduated, and she likes to come back and support the students by, you know, tuning in and talking about and engaging in the conversation. So engaging your alumni of the course as you kind of continue to have semesters where you've done this exercise is really nice. A nice way to kind of give that little, you know, connection there as well. So as far as the student experience, you know, sometimes students are kind of intimidated by this exercise because they haven't really had a lot of experience like this. Sometimes they need some practice first off, narrowing in and reporting on social media marketing trends. It's really important that you tell them that they should go beyond their personal opinions to discuss the trends, virtues, and pitfalls, and then decipher, is this a trend that's worth getting behind and investing my energy into understanding more about and trying to analyze it? Students, like I said, they're often really nervous about something like the live event experience, but they often end up thinking it was really beneficial. And so it's important to reassure them throughout, right? So the image on the left is just a screenshot from two of my students last semester who did the event and had such a fun time with it. They had really good rapport back and forth. They ended up working well together. And then at the end, they kind of, as a surprise even to me, they pulled out this little whiteboard and they had kind of indicated, connect with us, you know, and here's our LinkedIn handles. And it's just fun. You can see that they really were enjoying themselves, and it was really neat to see. And then this quote over here, again, is from our the creative director of the agency we work with. And he says, you know, the experience of them rolling with punches when small technical glitches happen is invaluable. When we become somewhat numb to that as we kind of go through our careers, but it's important for them to have that experience early on. And they even said, we look for that when we're hiring. We look for people who are able to kind of roll with it if something happens that they don't quite expect, because not everything is always going to go perfectly according to plan, what we know, right, when we're dealing with technology. So giving the students this experience to get them a little bit more comfortable in this live setting that's more public facing, I think is really tremendous experience to have as a college student. I'll also say from the perspective of implementing the live event, we use Livestream Studio when the event is done in person, and we can use this when we're adapting the event to a completely virtual environment. It's also used for beaming to Facebook Live, and it could also be used to beam to YouTube. So if you wanted to stream it through YouTube instead of Facebook Live, or in addition to, you could use Livestream Studio to do that as well. It also allows, this program also allows us to pull in Twitter content. So if you noticed on some of my previous slides, What's kind of neat, you can even see it in this screenshot here. Below the two students, you see the tweets that are kind of scrolling across. It allows the we had set it up to do is to pull in any tweets that were using the hashtag #UAkronMarketing, which is kind of the hashtag I use for anything in my class, anything for related to the department. That's the hashtag that we use. So as professional conversations are occurring about the event, you can see those tweets being pulled in, and Livestream Studio allows you to do that as well. The landing page can be customized through Livestream Studio as well. So for our class, for example, this past semester, what we did was, because the publication network of Monsters Unlimited, it's called Speaking Human. So what they did was they used the URL speakinghuman.live for the time being when the event was going on. So that if someone went to speakinghuman.live at that time, they would have been able to see the event following in real time. It's not a permanent link, but you can purchase a permanent URL and forward it to that so that the content would stick around and you'd be able to play it back later as well. If you're doing the activity online, I'd also consider having the students use something like Slack for communication during the event. So because they can't be kind of standing nearby right there, sometimes it's helpful to have a really quick communication platform, since everybody's kind of, in their own place, their own apartment, wherever it might be. So it's nice to have something like Slack where the students can kind of be talking back and forth to me, to Monsters Unlimited, to each other, to kind of say, hey, okay, now it's your turn, you're on, here we go, right? Some of these things that it's a little harder to do with email because it might be a little bit slower. Another thing that's kind of interesting is that even though it is through Facebook Live, after the event each semester, it automatically goes to an archived page on Facebook. So your video list will have your anything live that you've done. So anyone can go back and re-watch the videos through a playlist that we've created. And for example, with us, it's facebook.com/UAkronMarketing. That's the page for our department. Also, Monsters Unlimited has set it up so that they've set up this particular Vimeo URL that you see here. So if you click on this URL, you'll be able to see past events, and they're all kind of archived on this page by semester, so that someone could visit that page on Vimeo as well and would be able to see, the previous versions of the exercise. In addition to, like I said, the playlist that's housed on the Department of Marketing Facebook Live. So with the remaining few minutes I have, I want to just talk briefly about some benefits that the students have expressed to me over the years that we've, done this exercise. And one is that I think it's really neat that you can kind of take a look at Facebook Insights, because any, business page is going to have the opportunity for you to be able to see Facebook Insights. So you can check on your impact during the event, right after the event, a few days after, a week after, to kind of see how many people it's reached, how many people have watched the video. And so what I was able to do is, kind of check some of this out right away and tell the students, hey, here was the impact of your event, and here's how many people we reached, here's how many people engaged, etc. Also, after this most recent event that I just did a few weeks ago, I assessed several different I used several different learning related scales to ask the students about the exercise. And they really gave me a lot of very positive, very favorable feedback, that they felt that they learned a lot, that it was a very good social learning experience, that their learning satisfaction was rather high. And then you can see some of their qualitative comments here as well, responding to the question, in your opinion, what were the benefits of the live event? A lot of it, I think, is focused around professional development. It made me kind of feel like this is something I've never done before. I didn't have experience with this. I got to learn more about influencers and then present it in this kind of, very unique format. And so I think a lot of that feedback really kind of hones in on their developing their professional skills. Another question that I had asked them was, what did you learn from this project? And again, yes, a lot of it was about digging into the particular topic, but a lot of it was also about how to kind of have these conversations virtually, how to gain confidence in these kind of oral presentations that take on a very unique environment. I think this is different than them getting up in front of the class and presenting about a slide deck that they've put together with a team. I think this really gives them the opportunity to exercise a different type of conversation and a different type of skill. Just as a final exemplar, I wanted to share from a student from a couple of semesters ago. And if you're interested in seeing the actual link to his finished polished blog post, I left it here. But then later on LinkedIn, he kind of shared that he really just had such a positive experience doing this particular exercise. It was a dream of his to become, a published writer. And for him, this was the opportunity to fulfill that dream. And so that was really meaningful and exciting to me to kind of see how much this exercise meant to him and how he's able to now, again, continue to use it as a piece of professional developed content. So just to kind of wrap things up briefly, there is going to be the handout available that kind of provides more information about the project overview and the timeline. It also provides the rubric that I use to grade the live event. So happy to share that, talk a little bit more about that if you have any questions. And I also do want to just send a really big thank you out to Monsters Unlimited and the team there. Patrick, Bob, and Michael in particular have been so helpful, just helping me kind of do the technical piece of some of this. I've learned a lot about Livestream Studio. I've learned how to do, some of these different things that I just never, expected we'd be necessarily doing in this marketing class. It's been a really great way to engage a local agency. And I'm just very thankful for their help that they've been willing to provide and the time that they've been willing to invest in the students' learning experience. So thank you for joining today. I really appreciate the opportunity to share my insights with you. Please feel free to reach out to me through email, through Twitter, LinkedIn. Happy to connect with you and answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexa. So you've got you're out of here in 1 minute. I
can take a few extra minutes. Yeah, that's fine. We can take a
Correct. There's a couple questions in here. Maybe we can answer them real quick. What's your class size, and do you do this for all of your classes?
For all my social media marketing classes, it usually hovers somewhere between about 20 to 25 students per class.
Great. And then as part of these classes, do you use the Mimic social simulation?
The Mimic social simulation in the class right now, but I would definitely, consider incorporating that in the future.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Is it the essentials of social media
Correct.
Marketing that you do use? Okay, gotcha. Can you give us any more specifics on how the Facebook Live event happened in a virtual class environment?
Yes. So through Livestream Studio, we were able to kind of take the students' individual, camera broadcast. They, like I said, none of them were actually physically together when they were doing this. And we were able to say, we want to pull from this, and we want to project it to, through Facebook Live so that they were able to have that discussion in real time. And probably a more detailed discussion is a little beyond, right now. I'd be happy to follow up. If someone would like to follow up, I'd be happy to discuss some more of that detail. But the opportunity to be able to use that program to really kind of help us, merge the two individual cameras and the individual conversations was very helpful.
Great. And then last question. Do you have any advice on how to find which blog topics would be relevant?
Yeah, I think, like I said, the biggest recommendation that I have for the students is to start by really getting immersed in some of the, popular and some of the industry press that is maybe something they're not even realizing is out there or they're not necessarily paying attention to. Instead of just Googling social media marketing trends, I like them to kind of start getting immersed in the different type of topics that are being reported on by some of those different companies and some of those different publications. And I think that's usually a really good place to start. Also, I try to bring in current events to my class. And so sometimes after class, they'll say, is that something that you mentioned that you think would maybe be good for me to kind of focus on? I'm kind of interested in that. So I think by giving them some suggestions or some examples through what you talk about in class and also encouraging them or pointing them in the right direction of some resources to go try to maybe get their own inspiration is a good way to approach it.
Great. Yeah, I think you can also throw in podcasts. Usually what's going on with inside of a podcast is usually pretty timely and relevant as well as far as topic goes. Great. Well, Alexa, we appreciate your time. in preparation for this assignment, and also just doing really cool stuff with students, and then publishing that and making it available for others to follow along. So thank you for doing that. Have a fantastic weekend, and
thank you. I
we'll stay in
appreciate the
touch.
opportunity.